Welcome back, Buckeye Nation. Today we are going to be talking about Ohio State's first spring practice, what different observations mean, talking about some key players, going over the new depth chart again as it is currently projected. Again, it is just spring practice. Nothing is even close to final. Summer practice and fall practice haven't happened yet. That leaves all kinds of room for injuries, different players jumping each other on the depth chart, so on and so forth. So it's going to be all Ohio State football today. We're going to be reading two articles, one specifically talking about Jim Knowles and what he's changed on the defense, another just talking about some key observations, which includes Jim Knowles' scheme changes, but also includes some other notable observations. Without further ado, let's get right into it. But before we do, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit the notification bell. Comment your thoughts on Ohio State's first spring practice down below, and also give me your record prediction for the Ohio State Buckeyes entering the 2023 season. So let's get started here. Also, like this video and watch it all the way through so that it can pick up in the algorithm. Where I want to start off is first talking about 2022 Ohio State just for a minute or so. This Ohio State team had once again one of the best offenses in the country. It was second in scoring offense, only behind Tennessee. It was first in offensive efficiency for practically the entire year. The defense also improved from 2021. And yes, I do think the 2022 offense was better, despite the fact that it regressed in scoring. I think what they did against Georgia did indeed show that. And if Miyan Williams and Henderson and Jackson Smith and Jigba were healthy for the whole year, which is a big what if, but if they were, the offense certainly in the scoring category would have shown that it was much better than the 2021 offense, especially at offensive line and in the run game. But again, injuries happen, life happens, some things are just out of your control. What was within Ohio State's control was defensive changes. After a bad 2021 year where Ohio State allowed 22.8 points per game, which was 38th in the nation, they only allowed 21 points per game, which was 24th in the nation. They introduced a more complicated scheme, a scheme that was taken over from a successful Big 12 defense in Oklahoma State, which was, of course, led by now Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles. Complex, different than schemes Ohio State has used in the past, and they still improved. But large losses against Michigan and a painful loss against Georgia, where it wasn't Ohio State's offense that caused them to fall behind, but rather their defense that couldn't clutch up in the end, where Jim Knowles now has to make some changes. He just has to. The defense was not good enough for what Ohio State wants on a year-to-year basis. It was not even top 20. It was top 10, top 15 for most of the year. Then the Michigan and Georgia game happened, and everyone saw those two games and went, whoa, what happened here? So, a very good year in my standards for Ohio State. Again, the Michigan loss was really the only low spot of the year. They nearly beat Georgia, and if they beat Georgia, they would have squandered TCU, absolutely, in the national title game. So Ryan Day, once again, very close to reaching the top, like he was in 2019, like he was in 2020. But it didn't happen. So now, of course, it's Ohio State football. They have high expectations. They're going to be new storylines. There's going to be questions surrounding, can Ryan Day, get back to beating Michigan? Can Ryan Day get back to winning the Big Ten? Can he win a playoff game, or was the playoff win in 2020 a fluke? Can the defense improve? And we'll talk about that just in a few seconds. What's going to happen at quarterback? We know that Ryan Day has an elite reputation with developing quarterbacks, putting them in the NFL, and they always play elite at the college level. But replacing a quarterback like C.J. Stroud, who was an All-American, whether on second team or third team, was an All-American for his 2 years starting at Ohio State, and was the Big Ten Offensive Player of the Year and first team All-Big Ten quarterback in his 2 years starting at Ohio State. What happens at offensive line with 2 NFL tackles leaving? What happens at running back? Are they healthy again? And what happens with the defense and their schematic changes? As Jim Knowles is removing the jack position. The jack position is being a hybrid defensive end linebacker spot. It was taken up by Jack Sawyer this past season. Toward the end of the year, it wasn't used much. Jack Sawyer only saw action in one snap in the Georgia game. Ohio State very rarely used the jack position as the year progressed. And Jack Sawyer, by the way, has been someone that, as a friend of mine has described, has been almost a complete non-factor in big games. And hopefully, if you're an Ohio State fan, or maybe if you're a college football fan who just likes great defensive line play, Jack Sawyer switching to a more traditional defensive end role should help the team out a lot. Currently you have JT Tuimoloau, Ty Hamilton, Tyleik Williams, Jack Sawyer, Tuimoloau, of course, being the pure-bred defensive end type, Jack Sawyer kind of being that hybrid there. Now you're going to have 2 true defensive ends instead of 1 defensive end and a jack player is what you're going to have there. And part of me, again, I'm a college student who reports on the scheme and loves it. I have a lot to learn when it comes to schematics, but I think that having just more size at the defensive line, instead of trying to play that whole hybrid game where Jack Sawyer, when he's, playing linebacker, being hybrid, he's going to have to be faster. He's going to have to be smaller. He's going to have less power. Going to have to be, he's going to have to be better at pass coverage than just worrying about stopping the run or rushing the passer. He's going to have more roles because the jack position's a very versatile position. And going into Jim Knowles' first season as Ohio State's defensive coordinator, Jim Knowles obviously expected that position to be a significant part of his defense, but as I've already mentioned, it was eliminated from the defense almost entirely by the end of the year. Now, Knowles hasn't said it's just completely out of the equation. There's still some room for it, but I'm going to read this article by 11 Warriors that goes deeper in. Last year was Jack Sawyer and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, who transferred to Notre Dame, probably because of the elimination of the jack position. They both saw semi-regular playing time in the hybrid linebacker defensive end role during the regular season. None of them made any noteworthy plays, though. In the final game of the year against Georgia, Sawyer just played 1 snap at jack. Jean-Baptiste didn't line up in the spot at all. The hybrid edge defender was a major element of his defensive scheme at Oklahoma State, which makes sense because in the Big 12, the offenses are just more pass-heavy. They're air raid, spread, happy, friendly. They just are. That's why TCU runs a 3-3-5. It's why Iowa State runs a 3-3-5 to counter that air raid. It's why Oklahoma, when Alex Grinch and Lincoln Riley were there, and they transferred that over to the Pac-12, which is why Utah just runs over them every time they play them, because Utah is a team that likes to run the football. They're not an air raid team. They're not a spread team. It matches up very well with that 3-3-5 defense, which is what Oklahoma used under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, and it worked pretty well in the Big 12, but whenever they met a more physical run team that wasn't from the Big 12, they just get flat out pancaked. It's kind of what happened, and I think that's kind of what Knowles experienced in his first year. I mean, you bring over a defense that was very successful in the Big 12, and you realize you got to change the 2 in the 12 to a 0. You're in the Big 10. You're going to have to defend the run more. You're going to have more physical, bigger players. And after anticipating the jack would be on the field for at least a third of Ohio State's defensive snaps in 2022, he said the Buckeyes used it only 15% of the time. The use of the jack position was more than halved compared to his original expectations. Quote, By the time I left Oklahoma State, it was almost exclusive, and I knew we wouldn't have that here. We're built more as a 4-down, and our front's pretty darn good. Exactly. Ohio State traditionally is more of a 4-down kind of team, more of a Big Ten defense. So we tried to adapt to it. Continuing with what Knowles said, so you don't want to mess with that too much, but I thought that they could get up to be a third. And it just didn't, we weren't as productive out of it. You have to go with what works. So Knowles, again, like I said in the preseason in 2022, first-year defensive coordinator. It's going to take longer than 1 year when you're changing schemes to be ultra successful in an elite defense. He's learning. He's adapting. Yes, the Michigan game and Georgia game were not fun by any stretch of the imagination, but I expect him to make adjustments. And I think they're making adjustments on defense to better match up against the country's best offensive lines. Michigan, Wisconsin, Penn State, maybe even Minnesota. I mean, they lost a lot of their O-line production, but they've been great at O-line under P.J. Fleck, and Ohio State plays them next year. Ohio State plays several teams that will have some of the nation's best offensive lines, Michigan being one of them. And even if it was only Michigan and the rest of the Big Ten had just crappy offensive lines, you still want to make that adjustment because beating Michigan just matters that much. For Sawyer, of course, he'll be playing exclusively as defensive end. He'll start opposite of JT Tuimoloau after moving back and forth between defensive end and jack in 2022, which probably explains why he wasn't that productive. Knowles said he'll work on being the fundamentals for being an end. It's important for jack, Knowles said. I feel like he didn't have the improvement or the big jump that he could have last year because he got involved with the jack stuff, so he wasn't as focused. When you're so versatile, it's hard to be an extremely versatile player and be great in college football because instead of honing in on one elite thing, one elite assignment, you're trying to cover for multiple different things. It's what makes versatile players and dual threat quarterbacks, for example, in my opinion, extremely impressive. While Knowles doesn't plan to play Sawyer at jack and Jean-Baptiste is now at Notre Dame, the hybrid position could still return to the defense this fall, which could be the development of a healthy Mitchell Melton. Knowles is still bullish on Melton's potential to be an impact player. So I would say look out for Melton. Also look out for C.J. Hicks, who could fill that role as that hybrid defensive end edge player linebacker. Watch out for that, but it wouldn't surprise me. It partially wouldn't surprise me if the position was nearly eliminated entirely. Because Jack Sawyer coming out of high school was more built for that traditional defensive end role, and now he'll be moving back to that, and I think that will make Ohio State's pass rush that much more successful. It'll make their D-line even more successful at stopping the run. I just think their defense will be better overall because of the adjustments, and also because, look, they return Sawyer, they return Tuimoloau, they return Eichenberg, they return Steele Chambers, they've brought in Davison, they brought in Igbinosun through the portal, they brought in Jahad Carter, they returned Lathan Ransom, Denzel Burke, and Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton, and Mike Hall too. Underrated defensive tackle room. The Buckeyes' run blocking and offensive line play overall, I think, should improve with both starting guards returning. Ohio State returns Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson. That's pretty big. Donovan Jackson, I think, is a first-team All-Big Ten, potentially All-American caliber guard. Really great. Luke Whippler leaves, which stinks. The way he handled Jalen Carter in that Peach Bowl was very impressive. But Jacob James should fill in his shoes quite well, and Victor Cutler is currently, according to ourlads.com, projected as the second-string center. He's an incoming transfer from, I think, Louisiana Monroe, if I'm not mistaken. Some other things to look at, just some other observations. Marvin Harrison Jr. was caught returning punts as first-team punt returner. It's because Emeka Egbuka, he was the main returner last year, but he's missing the spring with an injury. The BuckeyesWire.usatoday.com article brings up a good point, though. Why would you risk him? Punt return position, I mean, as a Michigan fan, I remember Ronnie Bell in 2021. Lined up at punt returner, got injured. Big detriment, big detriment, honestly, that had to happen. Now, luckily, it happened early in the year, so Michigan's offense could adapt and be good, be better, and not, have a high-impact player go out in the middle of a big game or in the middle of the year. But Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver by the circumference of the moon in college football. There's no reason to risk him. And he's miles better than any wide receiver that plays with him at Ohio State, then Egbuka, then Fleming. And they're some of the best wide receivers in the country. Devin Brown is switching to number 33 as tribute to Hall of Fame quarterback Sammy Baugh. The Sony Styles hype train has begun. I think five-star safety, five-star defensive player that came into Ohio State's 2022 recruiting class. The train has left the building already for me, writes the article. Styles should just be arriving, but he's already heading into his second season and about to become a household name. He's as big as a linebacker with safety speed, a combo that reminds me of former Buckeye Darren Lee, and we all know what Lee accomplished in Columbus in 2014 and 15. Davison Igbinosun is looking good. He wears number 20, and he looks massive at 6'2" for a corner, and he's very long as well. The transfer's massive. The biggest corner in a long time to suit up for the Buckeyes. Him working opposite of Burke should help Burke improve his play and overall just function in what was one of the more disappointing secondaries in the nation last year. I'm not going to say the worst because it wasn't, but for all the talent at secondary, for how good Denzel Burke was in 2021, it was a pretty porous secondary unit. It well underperformed my expectations. He already has plenty of experience in the transition from the SEC to the Big Ten. Shouldn't be a big one at all. Can't wait to really see what he can do in the fall. Offensive line is a big concern. Day is concerned about the offensive line depth. It makes sense at tackle. Some think that this could be a bigger issue than quarterback. It could be. I'd especially look at that with defensive tackles. I mean, you lose Paris Johnson Jr. and DeJuan Jones, who are both highly rated tackle prospects. Josh Fryer and Zen Michalski, maybe I didn't pronounce that name. Those are the current projected tackles. Josh Fryer played a little bit last year, but losing two NFL caliber tackles, I think you are going to see some weakness at the tackle position. I think the interior of that offensive line is going to be among one of the best in the nation. The tackles, the outside, the exterior of that O-line, I don't know what to expect of the exterior of that offensive line, except that I think it'll probably be middle of the road or maybe above average in the Big Ten. Penn State, Michigan should definitely have better tackle rooms than Ohio State does this coming season, with returning production especially there. But the interior of that offensive line for Ohio State, with Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson and some depth at center, that's going to be scary, especially if Williams and Henderson can stay healthy, and with Justin Fry focusing on power for the offensive line. Maybe Ohio State can, do what Michigan could do at some points last season, where at the interior point of attack, they just create big holes in opposing D-lines, like what Michigan did against Penn State. That wouldn't shock me at all if Ohio State, with the depth at guard and center, and if they stay healthy at running back, if they do have a game like that, like what Michigan had against Penn State, where they just run over an opponent and don't have to pass much. That's how much depth I think they have in the interior of the O-line. But tackle, I understand why that could be a depth issue, and especially with practically no returning production there, why it could be a concern. Key position groups to pay attention to are cornerback with Burke and Igbinosun, and quarterback with Brown and McCord. I think those are some of the biggest position groups to pay attention to. You could add in tackle with some new starters there, but quarterback is obviously going to be a big headline. And with how disappointing the secondary was last year, it's going to be exciting to see what Burke and Igbinosun can do. Also look out for, safety. Lathan Ransom, Jihad Carter. we'll see what can happen there. Also, Kai Stokes and Sony Styles. So safety, the whole defensive back room, and quarterback and O-line should be an interesting story to follow. Wide receiver and tight end practically return all of their production. Same with linebacker. Same with running back. Defensive line and the interior of the offensive line, they lose some production there, but overall I think they're pretty set in those areas. Look out for secondary and quarterback. I think McCord is going to start over Brown. I think a lot of people believe that, but again, Ohio State has a deep quarterback room. I think Brown and McCord are both Power 5 level starters, if not greater than that. That's all I'm going to say for this video, for what we've learned about Ohio State in spring practice. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around.